In this video, we're going to look at the basics of the state machine. The state machine is the tool and the editor that creates behaviors. And behaviors are the fun part of Sumerian that allows you to add interactivity and some dynamic changes within your scene. If you remember, the end goal of this project is to create a VR scene where you take a game ball and drop it either in an orange bucket or in a blue bucket, and that'll then respawn the ball up at the top of the scene, and then or up at the top above the table, and it'll roll back towards you, and you continue to go through that training process. Now, the difference is that when you're trying to test this scene, you can't actually move the ball. You can't pick up the ball with your mouse and drop it into the buckets. So we have to have a different way to test it. So in this particular video, what we're going to do is being able to create a behavior that moves both buckets, so we can still catch the ball as it rolls off the table. So this is a behavior that we're going to be creating really just for testing our scene and making sure that everything works properly, but it also works as a really great kind of introductory behavior to create. So with that, in this video, we're going to cover behaviors, states, and actions. So let's get started. All right, if you remember in the last video, what we did is we created these buckets, the blue and the orange bucket, and then we created some walls. These walls have colliders on them. The buckets all have colliders on them so that the ball can actually drop into the bucket and will be contained in the bucket. The ball will also run into the wall if it slips past the player, the user, and so the ball will be contained within this room. So that is what we did in the last video. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so we can slide both of these buckets back and forth. The reason for this is twofold. One is that we just want to have a simple behavior to create as an introduction to the state machine. The second reason is that for testing this scene, I can't use my mouse, using a PC, I can't use my mouse to pick up the ball and drop it into the orange bucket or blue bucket. I have to be in VR in order to do that, at least when we actually make that, when we enable this for VR. So to test it, what we need to be able to do is make it so we can move both, we can slide the buckets back and forth, it'll catch the ball, and then it'll continue on with the training simulator. So it's kind of as another way to figure out how to use state machine behaviors and also to test the scene to make sure it works. So again, this is not going to be a behavior that we use in VR, but it is going to be a good testing behavior and an introduction. So we're going to select our buckets entity over here in the entities panel. If I expand that, you see I have a blue bucket and an orange bucket, and I'm going to add a behavior and a state machine to this buckets because I want to move both of them together. And that's the whole reason why I join them or group them like this. So if you haven't added a state machine component, what you do is just click add component and then go to state machine. I already have it on there, so we're just going to go open up the state machine, and then there's no behaviors. So what we want to do is click the plus button to start a new behavior. We will have several behaviors in this scene, and so it's always good to name them appropriately so you can navigate between your behaviors, especially when you're troubleshooting and trying to figure out if there's an issue somewhere. Being able to navigate between behaviors is really helpful. So we'll name this one bucket move for PC because again, this is only a behavior that's going to be used when you're using this scene or playing this scene on the PC, not in a VR headset. Great. All right. Now, the way that a state machine works, this is the state machine. Here's the state graph, and a state machine is based on states and then actions that transition to various states. If that sounds confusing, just hold tight and it'll make sense very, very soon. All right, so we have state 1 already in this behavior. If I have it selected, you see the properties or the actions attached to this right now. There's nothing. It's just called state 1. So we're going to first rename this, and we're going to call it no movement. The states that we want to add to it are, or the actions we want to add to this is, and to do that, we click add action. The action we want for this, we actually want two actions, but we don't want both of the same, is search for key down. And then click add or just press enter. But the key down that we want to use is not the A key, You could use the A key, but I want to use my left arrow. So I'm going to click left arrow. And then I want to add another action, and I want to use the same one, key down. So I'll add that. But instead of A, I want to do right arrow. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Oops. Zoom in. Now I'm going to add another state. I'm going to drag it over here. And I'm going to call this state blue bucket. Now I'm going to add another action by clicking add action. And the movement that I want to use, the action I want to use is this tween move. Now, what is tween move? Well, let's think about move. A move is an action first that actually just moves an entity somewhere. So it changes the translation values, so the X, Y, and Z translation values. Now, a simple move action will move an entity from one location to another in one frame. So essentially, it'll be here, and then it'll be here. That's not exactly what we want. We want to create an animation so it moves. You can see the change from one movement, from one location to another. That's what tween is. It's short for in between. So in between, the tween or in-betweening is essentially showing the change from one location to another, and that's exactly what we want. Now, the tween bucket, or the tween move we want is the translation we want to be +1. We want to uncheck the relative checkbox. And the time that it's going to take, this is what's also different about the tween, is that you can decide how long it takes for this movement to take place. We don't want it to be, this is 1,000 milliseconds, that equals 1 second. We don't want it to be that long. We want it to be about 200 milliseconds. And the easing type is essentially, if you think about it, is what does it go from one position to the next just very equally and very linear? Or do you want it to kind of speed up and slow down? That's what the easing type is. So we're going to do quadratic in and out. So we'll have a quadratic move, both as it starts the movement and as it ends the movement. We'll see what it looks like in a second. The next action we want to add is a key up action. Now, the key up action we want, because the blue button is on the left, we're going to use the left arrow. And again, we'll complete this behavior, and then it'll make a lot more sense. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, but to go the other direction. But we want to use the orange bucket. So what we're going to do, or make it so we move over to moving the orange bucket underneath the ball. But instead of starting from scratch and starting a new state and then adding pretty much these same actions to it, but with just some slightly different properties, all I'm going to do is click blue bucket and then duplicate state. I'm going to slide it over here and rename it orange bucket. Now, instead of +1, I'm going to make it -1. I'll keep the 200 milliseconds, quadratic in, out. But however, for the key up action, I don't want the left arrow. I want to use the right arrow. So I'm going to just put my cursor inside the text box and select the right arrow. There it is. Now, we have all the states set up the way we want. Now we just got to add transition. So essentially, this no movement state, if you notice, is set as the initial state. So when we enter the scene, when we press play, it'll be this entity, these buckets will be in the no movement state. It'll be waiting for us to either click the left arrow or the right arrow. When we click the right arrow, I'm going to select inside. You see I'm going to select this action here, or this transition label, and I'm going to drag it over to the blue bucket, because the left arrow is going to move the blue bucket underneath. And then when I release it, so when the left arrow is up, so on this key left arrow up, it will then go back to the no movement state. Similarly, on the right arrow, I'm going to drag that over to the orange bucket state. And on the on key right arrow up, I'm going to bring it back to the no movement. Let's press play and see how this works. I'm going to hide the ball for right now because I don't really need that. And to hide entities, you just simply press this the eye icon over here in the entities panel. So let's press play. Notice that no movement is highlighted with this green. Now, as I hold down the left arrow, it goes to the blue bucket. As I hold down to the right arrow, it goes to the orange bucket. So essentially, it is moving between those. So you see it transitioning between the no movement in the blue bucket or no movement in the orange bucket. That's depending on if I hold my right key arrow down, it goes to the blue bucket. I'm still holding it. I mean, as soon as I release it up, it'll transition back to no movement where nothing actually happens. But if I select the right arrow and I hold that down, it'll transition to the orange bucket. It'll then move the orange bucket or both buckets over. And so the orange bucket is positioned underneath the table. And then when I release it, it'll return back to the no movement state. So this is a simple behavior to control our buckets within our scene. And again, this is only for testing our scene. All right, let's see how this works. I show the game ball so I can actually see it. And I'm going to press play and just catch it into one of the buckets. It doesn't really matter which one. So I'm going to slide over the orange bucket. There it is. Now if I move up, there it is. The ball's contained in the orange bucket. Now again, this is just a very simple behavior to demonstrate how you use your keyboard to control some entity within your scene. It's the basics of the state machine. There's a lot more you can learn about the state machine, and there's a lot of tutorials that we have available if you want to check out more. But in the next video, we're going to look at getting a little bit deeper into the state machine and behaviors to make a lot more interactivity and a much more fully integrated scene. So I hope you join us. And again, if you need a little more practice, make sure you check out some of the tutorials available on the documentation site. All right, we'll see you in the next video.